Talafalava ya oto. Malole se formawa. Malilangi e mama. So I said, welcome everyone. May you have good health and clear skies, which is a familiar Samoan saying, but of course we're kind of happy for the rain now. Whawhatai mo le awanoa e tawa noa oto I lanei aso e winga lo otusi. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today to you about my book, My View from the House by the Sea. So hopefully you can already tell that this is part of my view from the house by the sea. Amazing and beautiful. Hi. So I'm going to try to wrestle the mouse here and switch screens without disrupting anything too radically. I was sitting on my lanai a couple of days ago thinking about what photos I would show you, and I was drinking a cup of tea from Frederick and Son in Bremen, Germany, thinking about my recent visit there when I was cruising on the Weser River on a sunny Sunday afternoon. Can everybody see the screen? Or I had a very moving trip to Neuengamme concentration camp. Stood on the shore of the North Sea and thought about my grandmother leaving there many, many years ago, knowing that she'd never see her homeland again. So why am I talking about Germany? Well, this is another beautiful photo of all of those wonderful treasures that I saw there. But the reason I was in Germany was because of this little Samoan girl. Her name is Heimara, and I went there to visit her, and I'll tell you more about that later. But when I went to Samoa 15 years ago, I never would have predicted that someday the two of us would be standing together on a cold, wet night in Bremen, Germany. Well, we're going to come back to that in a little bit, so let's go to Samoa first. I think most people here know where Samoa is. I know you do, and I didn't get your name. What was your name?
Lila.
Lila. Okay, great. Lila came from Upolu, which is the island that I lived on while I was there. I like this map particularly because it shows not only the islands, but the territories of the sea that surround those islands, because we know it's not just the little rock outcrop that makes the country, it's all of the international and national waters surrounding them. Of course, there we are, way up at the top, Samoa and American Samoa, right in here. I just clicked it and nothing happened. Let's see what I did wrong.
Did you get it? Is it maybe we lost the mouse from the...
I don't know.
Maybe it's not in the right spot.
Yeah, maybe. Let me get the... Let's try it. Okay. Try it again. Ah, there. Thank you. Just got to keep the mouse on the screen. That'll be good. So here are the main islands in Samoa. Two main islands. This one is about the size of Molokai. The other island, Savaii, is called the Big Island. And if you actually put an H in place of the S, you come up with Hawaii, which is ironically the Big Island here too. So I lived on the island of Upolu, which is like I said, about the size of Molokai. Well, there's my Peace Corps group. It must have been a big culture shock for a lot of them who were, brand new college graduates from Northeastern universities and whatnot to go there. Of course, I was lucky to go from Hawaii. I know that most of you probably, if you are not Samoan, know somebody who is Samoan, right? If you've lived here in Hawaii, you do know both the Hawaiian culture and a little bit about the Polynesian culture, because we've been learning and living that for a long time here. So I was lucky to know a little bit of Hawaiian language, to have lived here before I went. You may notice in this photo that in my 15 years younger self, I'm wearing a different dress than everyone else. This was at our Fia Fia night. Fia Fia is a big, it's like a pa'ina plus a luau times 100. It's a huge village-wide celebration, more food than everybody can eat. Everybody goes home with leftovers. There are dances by the village. In our case, we also danced. We did a beautiful Samoan siva, and then The young men did their haka, and then we did the Samoan sasa slap dance, which is one wonderful fun. So this was always our celebration after we graduated from our Peace Corps classes. So my dress was because I did the opening dance at the Fia Fia. I have no idea what it looked like, but it was a lot of fun. Later on, I changed into a matching pulatasi. That's what this kind of a dress is called, a pulatasi, so I could join the others for our dance. So I mentioned our training and graduation from our training, and then our official swearing in as Peace Corps volunteers. I lived in a small village called Manunu, and there were about 200 people in the village, each of us 16 volunteers. Well, there were two couples who were also about my age, so they went together obviously, but the rest of us went to homes where we were immersed in the Samoan culture. We met every day for Samoan language classes and other classes that would relate to our job when we got to our villages. And I lived with this gentleman here who was the pastor in the village, and his wife, Roma and Wilma. Eventually, I went to my village on the south side of the island, Potasi, and there's a map over here. If you want to look at it later, you can see it's just tucked in the little bay on the south side. The picture here on your left is the house by the sea. It was literally across the road from where I lived. I lived right here. I walked across the sandy road. There's the house by the sea, right on the beach. The bottom one is our family's flower tele, our family's meeting house and place where the ancestors were buried as well, and just all the area around there. I lived with a Samoan family, and as you can see in the center, that's a photo of a photo, but it's a wonderful picture of Niulunga Evaimalo, who was the father in the host family that I lived with. His wife, Sina, up there in the corner. Her grandfather came from China, and so Sina means China in Samoan. Over on the side are the kids. Heimara, you already saw a glimpse of, and then the other two, Fetu and Tia. And then down in the bottom corner there is grandfather Tama Masui. He's out there on the Sunday morning about 5:30 heating up the hot rocks for the umu in the background. And what he's actually doing in this photo is using the sharp side of a tuna can to scrape off the outside skin of the taro to get it ready for the Sunday umu. And we had that every Sunday. We had a big Sunday meal. Well, in addition to living with a family, I did have some projects that I did in the village, and one of them was a marine project. So I want to show you this beautiful photo of the white sand beach and the island that was just offshore. When I sat at the house by the sea, I could see the island of Nu'usawhe'e directly in front of me. So what was my job? Well, our group was kind of unique. Instead of being nurses or computer teachers or agricultural specialists, we were trained with a pretty general background and then told to go to each village and figure out our job, basically. So we had to do what was called a village situational analysis. So we went in and tried to figure out, what does the village want? What can they afford? What could we get a grant for? How is it sustainable? All those different things. They might want something that sounds reasonable, but in the long run isn't sustainable, for example. So that was our job, to help the villagers figure out those projects. So each of us did a different thing. Some may have helped build a preschool. Another one did a new water system in the village. In my village, because of the pre-existing desire that the village had for a marine project, that was the primary one that I did. So they had talked about that before they even got a Peace Corps volunteer. Each village requests a volunteer, and then they get interviewed and such, and then it's determined whether or not a volunteer is going to go to that village. So when I got there, they already had this marine project idea, and that's one of the ones that we did. We applied to the United Nations Development Program, got a grant for 48,000 Samoan dollars, 48,000 tala. And in addition to protecting the waters around in the bay. Let me see if I've got this on the screen. There it is. We worked with the Department of Fisheries and the Ministry of Land and Natural Resources to determine what the coral population was like in the village, how was our fish population doing, a baseline survey essentially. If we're going to improve things, we need to know where we're starting from, right? So this is, you can see that even though the coral had been greatly damaged, there were new little polyps coming up, so we were pretty excited about that. There were a couple of really bad cyclones in Samoa that did a lot of damage to most of the coral, and then it hadn't been too many years when they used to fish with dynamite and poison, which also killed the coral. So those types of things are no longer being done, but there's still recovery happening from a lot of those past instances. So we did not only the marine project, which included the protection of the coral by a marine reserve, which I'll come back to in a minute, but then also protecting the mangroves in the village, which of course are a huge asset of any kind of, it's interesting that we don't have mangroves here because they are on so many tropical places, but they're a really important part of the ecology. So one of the main things, as I mentioned, was the marine reserve. We did that little ring there is approximately what I would call the area of the marine reserve. We did, we tied buoys to ropes and then had concrete anchors, made a big circle in the bay, and that was prohibited from fishing. In the beginning, the local fishermen didn't like that idea, but then gradually they learned that basically this becomes a fish nursery, where if you don't fish in that area, you have more seafood, more fish, and they become big and they swim someplace else. And it was movable, and there was a fine paid if you went into the marine reserve and protected area. And of course the mangroves down there in the bottom. This is the area where that river comes into the sea, and that's where the mangroves are. These two people, in addition to the other family members that I talked about, these two people were part of my Samoan family. And Tuatangaloa Joe and his wife Tui, if you read the book, you'll know who they are, were very instrumental in not only helping with the marine project, but Joe is one of the ali'i of Samoa, so he was very helpful in getting things done when I needed somebody to move in a way faster than Samoa usually moves. Because we think that Hawaiian time is slow, but no offense, Leela, Samoan time is really slow. This is another picture of Niu at the project that was not the big fancy one like the marine project, but the one that actually won my heart was our little homework center. The village wanted a place where the kids could come after school to get help with homework and to not be in a place where they were constantly being asked to do chores and being distracted, and have a place where they could come to actually work on their studies. And then we got 3 donated computers, no internet, just computers, and opened the Potasi Homework Center with a grant from the New Zealand, High Commission as well. So we took what was a storeroom in the back of the church hall, and with a lot of help from the village, we turned it into a computer center. We could only have one person sitting at each computer at one time, so there would be 3, one sitting at the computer and 2 watching, and then we would circulate. When the kids were waiting, they'd sit on the floor and play games or do crossword puzzles or put together jigsaw puzzles. That's the Samoan flag there. At the beginning I thought, well, how can I teach computers? I'm not a computer teacher. But if you've never seen a computer, it turns out that you know a lot more about a computer than somebody else does. So you need to show them how to turn it on, how to save a file, and how to use a mouse, and all those things that we kind of take for granted, right? So I used the Microsoft Paint program, not only for mouse skills, but also, of course, then they could save a file and do all of those things. We would go to the atlases that along with dictionaries and other books people generously donated to the Homework Center. And they look in the back at all these beautiful flags and say, oh, I want to make that one. So we'd make a flag, and then we'd go to the wall map and look and see, oh, it's Jamaica, it's an island country like you, or oh, it's Israel, it's way over there. And so we turned every project into a geography lesson as well. Oh, it was so much fun. One of the things that I wrote about in my book, and actually the title of chapter 8, is called Adjusting to Fa Samoa. Earlier Vicki asked me, because it's mentioned on one of those items from the library over there, the word Fa Samoa is on there, and it defines it as the Samoan way, but I usually just tell people it's the way we do things in Samoa. So we had to learn, how do you do things in Samoa, which applies to everything from the Samoan language to all the various cultural rituals, and of course the food itself. This is part of that chapter, Adjusting to Fa Samoa. Earlier that evening, when I'd come in from the sea, I left my swim shorts outside the door to dry, and by the next morning someone had taken them. This was a common occurrence that I never got used to. For example, I wrote in my journal, I walked to the store and it was closed. So now I'm hot and sweaty after walking nearly a mile, and I have nothing to show for my effort. Well, that's not quite true. On the way back, I met 2 young boys who had my scrub sponge, which I put on the bench to dry in front of the house. You can't leave anything out here. I recently bought my 4th pair of flip-flops. 2 pairs mysteriously disappeared, although I probably left them by the door, which is like asking someone to take them. I left another pair in the hallway while I was gone at Christmas. When I came back and asked Mara, she said she wore them to the beach. I never saw them again. I didn't make a big deal of it because it's the way it is. But you'd think you could leave a goddamn sponge in front of your door. The textbooks say that communal societies share their goods rather than valuing individual ownership. That's a fancy way of saying it's no big deal if someone uses your stuff, and it's only stealing if they don't admit to taking it.
It's like that in a lot of places.
So that and a lot of the other customs that I had to get used to, including food, as I mentioned, your beef might come with a hoof on it, and then Sina had to do the hard work of turning it into dinner. Here's a typical Samoan meal. Down in the bottom there, we've got some pork. This is pisupo, which is the Samoan word for corned beef, which is Samoa's spam, essentially. And then we've got chicken and some kapisi vai, watercress, and more pork, and the ulu and the taro cooked in the umu. And then this is the palusami that I was talking about in that little bundle there that just is a delicious treat with all that good food. Church is another important part of Samoan culture. The missionaries first came there in about 1830, and the Congregational Church is the primary one. Down here in the bottom you see our church bell, which is the propane tank that was hit with an iron bar, and it made a beautiful sound and worked just great. This is our church choir up here. I'm not in the photo, even though I belonged to the church choir, because I took the picture, so I'm not in it. There is a picture in my book where you can, another picture of the choir where you can see my blonde head way in the back. I love this picture. These are the kids on White Sunday. White Sunday is the second Sunday in October. It's called Children's Day, and it's a bigger deal than Christmas for the kids. They get ice cream and treats and don't have to do their chores and get new dresses and necklaces and all kinds of decor to wear to church on Sunday, and they do the service, they do the prayers and the songs and everything. It's a great celebration. One of the reasons I love this photo is because when I look at it, I can see personality in every little face. Fire knife dancing, big part of Samoa. By the way, on that last photo, which if I can get back to it, and then you may have also seen on the picture of my host father, he also had this wonderful tattoo, which starts at the waist and goes all the way to the knees. The early sailors thought that the men were wearing pants because the tattoo is so thick it looks black all the way to the knees. I couldn't talk about Samoa without talking about Samoan buses, because they are part of the culture just as much as they are transportation. Very few people actually had cars in my village, so most people took the bus to town. As Peace Corps volunteers, we were prohibited from driving, partly because of liability, I'm sure. But also we were supposed to live at the same standard that the people that we were serving lived at, right? And so they needed to take the bus to town, so did we. So it was about a 2-hour bus ride to town, 2-hour bus ride back home, and get to town and do all of your main shopping. The main town was Apia. It's about, I'm trying to think, and Leela, you may correct me, right? 25,000 people, something like that, I think.
Yeah.
Not quite as big as Hilo, right? And so I would get on the bus in Apia and go back and forth that way. As you can see, the construction of the buses was kind of like a school bus with wooden interior and jerry-rigged in every which way, as you can see down there in the corner. This is the main city of Apia up in the top there, the parliamentary building and the Catholic Church being those two big edifices that you see. And to go out into this big field and find the right bus. I'll read you a little bit about the Samoan buses. Everyone knew and followed a seating etiquette. Young men went to the rear, followed by young women. On the morning ride, teenagers in red, blue, or green uniforms, depending on their school, sat in the back, flirted discreetly with their eyes, and passed notes, since passengers didn't talk. Old men and women sat in the front, and everyone else in between. If someone was seated toward the front and an older person got on, there was a spontaneous shifting to make room for the elder. At times, the bus was so packed that people literally stacked up, since passengers were expected to sit on one another's laps if it was full. The young people, 30 or under, started first, girls seated on girls, boys on boys, and small kids could sit anywhere. It wasn't unusual for somebody to get on the bus, sit down beside me, and hand me a kid that I had on my lap for an hour or two. The bus rides were one of my favorite parts of Samoa, even though it was hot and it was challenging and it was a long ride. I described it in my book in one place as being sort of a part of a living Venn diagram, where when I was on the bus I was part of Samoa, but it was also apart from me, and I could be in it and observe it at the same time. This is what I wrote one day about my trip. We begin the journey home. The air is wet and the colors intense from the rain shower just past. The sea and the coconut palms rush by on my left. The forest is a vivid green blur on my right, with houses, churches, and small stores interspersed as we pass through villages. Waves crash on the reef offshore. We drive by men trimming bushes with machetes and teenagers playing volleyball in the mud. 2 young boys run alongside, racing the bus as it goes by. Multicolored laundry is spread on rocks in front of the houses to dry. Bananas, cacao, taro, mango, breadfruit, and papayas grow everywhere. Young girls walk down the road holding hands. There are ever-present flowers of pink, red, orange, yellow, and white. Dogs, chickens, and sometimes pigs scurry to get out of the way. Women wash cooking pots at the water tap in the front yard. A boy on a bike wobbles carrying coconut frond baskets filled with produce on each side of the handlebars. I smell the smoke of cooking fires. There are people everywhere. Families gather at the end of the day. We cross the summit at Le Mafa with its spectacular view all the way to the sea. Now we drive through the villages on the south side of the island. A mother sits on her front step nursing her baby. Strips of laufala dry in front yards to weave into mats. Naked little boys run across the grass. We pass the still, clear water of the mangrove lagoon in Vauvai. We slow for the bumpy ride into Potosi. Children splash and play in the sea. The sun sinks into the ocean in a blaze of red and gold. Home, sweet home. My Peace Corps journey was much different than I expected it would be. I didn't expect it to change me in the ways that it did. I was 57 when I left the big island after I retired, and I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, and I thought Peace Corps might be a part of that, and it certainly was, because not only did I live with the Samoan family and, both of the Samoan families that I mentioned, but I learned so much about myself and about Polynesian culture. I understand Hawaii better for having lived in Samoa. I understand communal cultures. Most of the world is communal. Very few cultures are individualistic, and very few are as individualistic as America is. It would be good for everyone to go to a country where the values and the culture is different, because it teaches us so much. I love this back here on the wall behind us, try walking in someone else's shoes. Well, that's exactly what I ended up doing, was trying to walk in someone else's shoes and learning because of it. The connections that I made there, as you know, I still have, as I just mentioned earlier. I've been back to Samoa 4 times. I would have gone in 2020, but of course that couldn't happen, and then 2021, and then 2022, but I'm going in March. I'm going next month back to Samoa. It'll be my first trip back since I wrote the book, so that's going to be a huge celebration. I can't wait for that. I was there in 2007 and 2008, and some of you may remember what happened in 2009 when the earthquake in the Tongan Trench hit and affected Samoa, American Samoa, Tonga, killed 150 people in Samoa alone. And it did affect my village, and so I was thankful that I wasn't there. Obviously I was safe, but I was scared to death for my family, and I went back soon after that. Things are different. Lila's been back since then. She knows that things are different, especially on the south side. But everything recovers. You know, Polynesian people are nothing if not resilient. So I just mentioned that event because it was, of course, a changing event in the history of Samoa, but also in my life as well. It was such a huge earthquake. It was something called a doublet. There were 2 earthquakes, one 8.0, you can see the 2 spikes here, 8.0 and 8.1, 80 seconds apart. It was very hard to even flee from the tsunami that happened afterward because it was so fast and so huge. I'm back to my girl again, my Hanai niece, Himara. There she is with her sister. When one of the first pictures I ever took of her, she may have been 11 at that point. In 2019, I flew her to Hawaii. She got her degree from the National University of Samoa, majoring in computer programming with a double minor in physics and archaeology. Go figure. So I was so proud of her. Flew her here for 3 weeks, and then we had this wonderful full circle experience where, in addition to me learning about Samoa, she was able to learn about America and Hawaii, and It was an awesome time for us to celebrate together. She came, as I said, after she graduated, so there she is, showing off her degree. A couple years later, she got married to this wonderful gentleman, and I also need to mention one other little girl in Samoa. This little girl's name is Donna Laitichi. She was a baby when I got there, and the family changed her name and call her Donna now, which is just a wonderful honor. At first I thought, oh, it's just honorary, and then I realized, no, it's her name now. As you can see, whoops, next picture here. On this certificate over here for an amazing role model is what it says there. Donna Inosa. So, little Donna. This picture was taken about 2 weeks ago, right in the middle. I haven't seen her. This is the last time I saw her. She looked like this when she was dressed up for her school play. So I can't wait to go back and see my other little girl in Samoa. So back to Germany. I went there because Heimara is there, as I said, but why is Heimara in Germany in the first place, right? I mentioned that she got a double minor, including archaeology. The archaeology was the thing that really touched her. She did excavation of Samoan star mounds, and went into a lot of the archaeological history that's left there in Samoa. She works for the Center for Samoan Studies, which is part of the university, the National University of Samoa. And she was offered last year to, what is this? This is 2023, so the first semester of 2021, it would have been. She was offered an internship in Germany, and she's getting her degree online from UCLA in Cultural Heritage Management. And so she is working at the Übersee Museum in Bremen, Germany, which has one of the largest collections of Polynesian artifacts from the early days of Western sailing. And so not only is it a wonderful opportunity for her, which is delightful, but it was a good chance for me to go to Germany, where I had never been. I was quite taken with the windmills, by the way, they're amazing. In the center, you may remember this tale of the Brothers Grimm. They wrote the story about the old animals that decided to become musicians and were on their way to Bremen. So that little bevy of animals is everywhere in Bremen because they're kind of the mascot now. This guy on the other side is a famous German comedian. And here's Heimara, all grown up. This is the museum where she works now. The artifacts are amazing. The one on this side is Hawaiian tapa. This is the atrium of the museum. A lot of the ships that came back after they had unloaded all their cargo, etc., had holds that were empty, and so they would bring back like an entire sailing canoe in the hold of some of these ships. These are Samoan items. The one on the left is a dress made of siapo, which is the word in Samoan for tapa. This is from around 1900, the late 1800s, the Victorian era. So you can see how this siapo dress was made to look like the Victorian style, as we know a lot of the Hawaiian women did here as well. Some of the fine mats on the other side. Interestingly enough, you can see that this mat is not finished, the bottom one. The museum curators were excited about that because they say so often most of the things that they have in most museums obviously are possessions that were done very well and, you know, very unique, but not half done. But they were really excited to have this one because it shows them a lot more about the construction back then and the materials that they were able to see necessarily as well. The one on the top has little red feathers from an extinct parrot. And of course down the bottom we see tanoa, the ava bowls. Got one right over here, which is beautiful. These things are all set up on this table with these glass cases around them for a workshop that they were doing. But I also want to mention the glass cases. Of course, we know that most museums don't have their all of their exhibit out at one time. About 90% of every museum's collection is in the basement, in the archives, in the storage, right? As was the case here too. And of course I was lucky enough to get to go wander around in those storerooms, which is just amazing. They have open storage there, so they don't have any of their artifacts hidden or in drawers or anything like that. They're all out on display, but in the basement archives, so that's pretty cool. So one of Heimar's jobs was to do workshops with the people back home to talk about the provenance and the history of the items that they have in the museum there that came from Samoa. So I was lucky enough to be there for the very first workshop that they did. You can see over on the side there that they were working to get the photographs and the connections so that they could do this workshop with Samoa. It's part of sharing what they have in their collection. I need to tell you this story about this cowrie shell over here on the other side. That's actually an octopus lure.
Yeah.
The Hawaiian, yeah? That rings a bell with you too? Yeah?
My dad used to use it.
Yeah. There are different animals and different tellings of the legend, but the basic legend is that a snail and an owl and a rat decided to go sightseeing. And so they took a canoe and they were out having fun, and the storm blew up and the waves came up, and so the owl flew away. And the snail said, well, that's okay. I can glide right through the ocean and come back up on dry land again. So he just sunk to the bottom. And the rat was flailing around saying, help, help, help. So an octopus came right under him and put him on his head, took him safely to shore and dumped him off. And the rat jumped onto shore and said, ha, I left you a present. And the octopus fell on his head and he said, there's something kind of small and brown and warm there. And so he knew what the present was, and that made the octopus really mad. And so he said, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. So the octopus is still looking for the rat to this day. So Samoans always make the lure to look like a rat because that's what the octopus is going to look for first. When Heimara went to Samoa, she took her husband and their little boy. So this would have been the fall of 2021. And she had been nursing her little one, preparing for this trip, this huge change in her life, et cetera, et cetera. And so she got to Germany and found out she was 5 months pregnant. And so now they have 2 little boys. And the second one was born in Germany. Well, there's so much that I could tell you and more that I could read, but that's why I wrote the book, because I love sharing about it, love sharing about my experience, but you might have some questions, so I'll stop right there and we can talk story for a little bit if you like. But thanks for listening. I appreciate it.